FBSC Finance brings you 30 Minutes in Finance, your weekly finance-related podcast. I'm your host, David Garbutt.
I'm Arwel Griffith. I am a senior partner of JRW Chartered Surveyors. I suppose I've been around for 320 years, I reckon, in this profession. There or thereabouts, it can't be far off. No, I've been looking at buildings, all types, for about 40 years now, creating havoc in the business for all that time. So I'm, in addition to being a chartered surveyor, I'm also a chartered building engineer. So I do quite a varied type of work, I suppose. I'd look at all sorts of buildings, whether they be commercial, residential, for valuation, for structural and other condition. And I've seen all sorts, I suppose, over the years. I can't think of anything I've not seen, but you might surprise me.
No, appreciate that, and thanks for coming on. As I said earlier, I will really appreciate it. Are we able to go back that 300 years and sort of talk about how you actually got into the business in the first place?
Yeah, by all means. Well, I mean, I started off being a footballer, would you believe? And you wouldn't believe if you saw my current physique. But my dad was a footballer. We're from North Wales as a family. We had a dairy farm, so I was brought up on an outside life, milking cows at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. and having warm milk on my porridge shortly after finishing the milking in the mornings. So I got used as a young kid, I suppose, to working outside. And it's never really appealed to me to be inside all day, every day. And so when the opportunity arose to do a job that was outside, I suppose I was always going to jump at it. First, when the football career that I thought I was the next David Beckham and turned out not to be, I had to do something different. My dad was a professor of property law, and I suppose he shunted me towards property when he realised I wasn't going to make him several million kicking a ball into a net. So he pushed me in the direction of something in property, and I first started looking at becoming a solicitor. Soon decided I didn't fancy that, and then just took a course in land administration, which in those days, all those years ago, you had to do an exempting degree, an RICS exempting degree. So I did a degree in land administration, and then the 2 years assessment of professional competence, which at the time was quite an interesting time, because you had to work with somebody out on the tools, as it were. I mean, I was very lucky to be taught by a chap who's now in his early 90s, still around. I still have the opportunity to speak to him now and again, and he's still very interested. He was the sort of guy that I think I've tried to be when I've been teaching, that I remember in those days, I just wanted to get back and kick a football, but he always went the extra mile teaching with detail. And so if a standard building survey takes 3 or 4 hours, we'd be out for 5 or 6, solely because he was telling me how a window's put together, what holds the roof on, what means we're not falling through this floor, all of those sort of bits of information that in later years, I look back and I was extremely fortunate to be taught by him. And I think because it was practical, because it was outside, it was something that I took to almost like a duck to water, I suppose. And I've been doing the same now for almost day in, day out, as I say, for 300 and so many years.
Yeah, it is. And in terms of, I know you mentioned obviously that you occasionally do the teaching. Is that something that you're heavily involved in, as in sort of training new surveyors, and or is that just the odd bits and pieces that you do?
Well, I mean, I don't. There's not that many people coming into the profession. We're not a sexy profession.
Lies.
Yeah. And I mean, I was thrown into it many years ago when my dad's university, their third year degree lecturer decided 3 weeks into the new term that he'd had enough. And I remember my dad calling me on the Thursday before a 4-hour lecture on the Friday, saying, "I need somebody to come and talk about valuations. You'll do," he said. So, so on a Friday morning for probably about a year or 18 months, I used to go into university and try to make head or tail of how to teach people how to value. And that was a seat of your pants type stuff, I suppose. But looking back, it was a good grounding. I often think that there are turning points in everybody's career that, as you come towards the end of your career, which is inevitably where I'm heading sort of in the next few years, I look back on those days and, you know, having to know myself how to teach somebody how to value, and in later years how to practically teach somebody what to look at when they're on a particular site, is a challenge. And it's a challenge I've enjoyed, certainly. I'm sure some of the people that I've taught must think I'm bonkers. the last one that came along was a young gentleman that we were looking at the front of an old chapel, and the foundation stone was in the bottom corner, which I don't think he'd spotted. And so I said to him, "So, okay, what's this building talking to you about? What's it telling you? What's it screaming out at you?" And he was looking at the windows and the roof and the chimney and the party heads. And bless him, he couldn't see a thing really. And I said, "Well, it tells you a date it was built. It tells you who laid a foundation stone, and it's talking to you." And I think he probably went away. I don't think I ever saw him again. He probably went away completely nutty teacher. But I always think that, you know, the practical things. I was lucky enough. I was very, very lucky that I became in later years a president of the Chartered Association of Building Engineers. So in the early 2000s. And during the course of getting up the presidential ladder, I met some very, very pleasant engineers, one of which I'd worked my way up to a position of chairing the professional practice committee. And one of the guys said to me one day, "I'd quite like you as part of the team on something I'm involved with." So you know, we met up in Regent Street in London a few days later, and it turned out that he was one of the lead architects for the reconstruction of the Iranian embassy in Prince's Gate, that the SAS or somebody had done a great job of blowing up all those years ago. And so we were in the process of rebuilding it. So my old boss, Peter Dennell, said to me, "Look good on your CV." I mean, I didn't do an awful lot because I was not fully qualified at the time, but I was involved. He was teaching me to do things, and we did the levels survey for the new building that's there, because it had to precisely match the position, appearance, and pretty much everything else of the old building. And so I learned backdoor, I suppose, how to do a level survey on quite a prestigious building. But it's another thing I just stumbled into, really. I keep stumbling into these things, and yeah, and I'm still here somehow or another.
Stumbling away.
I was going to say, it's always, I've always, my journey to become the president of that particular body started. I lived on my own I had a little flat in Crouch End, North London, and a flyer had come through the door a few days previous about a speaker giving a talk on, I think it was some defects bill, latent defects bill or something that was coming in or making its way through Parliament. And it was raining. And I remember getting home to that flat from the office that was around the corner. These are in the days long before I was married. And I had nothing else to do that particular Tuesday night. This talk was going on down in Victoria. near the coach station. So I thought, well, why not? So I drove myself down in my little bright red mini metro and parked up in the rain, went to this talk, enjoyed it. And then the chap said, right, now we come to our annual general meeting, part of which was voting the new members of committee on. And he turned to me and he said, well, are you interested? And I said, no. And he said, well, you must be, you're here, aren't you? So that particular night, because I had nothing else to do, I ended up on the Greater London and City branches of the association, and driving home thinking, I'm not really sure quite what just happened. But I always say to people coming into the profession that you never know what's around the corner, and you have to take every opportunity, because from that one visit that I could easily have not bothered going to, I was chairman of that Greater London and City branch within 18 months. I was part of the National Council probably 2 years later. And then just 2 or 3 years after that, on the lowest rung of the presidential team that led eventually to the presidency. That took me around the world. I had some fantastic times, the missus and I traveling around America, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, pretty much all around Europe. And that was all because there was petrol in that red mini metro that night that got me down into Victoria.
But what did that actual job involve, as in the presidency? What were you sort of promoting or running or controlling?
Well, the association, you've got the RICS, of course, that is at the head of lots of surveying around the world. But there are various bodies at the head of engineering, which is a slightly different area, different space to what the RICS occupies. Engineers will look at technology of buildings, for example. You know, they'll be the people that make sure that your roof doesn't spread and fall off. The RICS does some wonderful work, whereas the Chartered Association of Building Engineers does equally wonderful work in a different space. And what the president really is a figurehead for that body. That year I'd wander around the globe giving talks on what was happening in the UK property industry, my take at least on what was happening. I'm sure that many times I was wrong, otherwise I'd give you the lottery numbers for today if you want them, or for Saturday. So it was just really, the president and the presidential team were figureheads traveling the world, spreading the message, if you like. But it was good fun. I mean, and along the way, it does, for engineers, for building engineers, it does much the same as continuing professional development that the RSS requires. It will give training. I was part of the ill-fated Home Information Packs initiative for 6 or 7 years. I remember going down into London, designing something called the Home Condition Report. And parts of that are now evolved into what the current RSS home buyer scheme is. So it was opportunity, and being the president gave me opportunity to meet people, an opportunity to learn more, because I don't think you ever stop learning, or if you think you know everything, then you don't know everything, is what I'd say. And I think that it was a time, and I'm pretty much out of that. I mean, I became jobs for the boys afterwards, of course. You know, as we got older and went through, they wouldn't ever want presidents to stop assisting them with their development over the years. So for the last 10, 15 years or so, I've been doing various things for that association. And the last thing I'm doing now is as a trustee of the Benevolent Fund, making sure that those that require assistance can have assistance. Because you don't know what's around the corner. Times are hard, aren't they? Times are very hard for some people.
We'll get on to some of those bits and how they might affect things going forward. But in terms of, let's say somebody was just looking to join the business or get into being a surveyor now, if you were starting again and this was the sort of path you'd chosen, is there a specific sort of route that you'd need to take, or is it you kind of, like you said, just fall into it by either being an estate agent and then going and training and doing further, or how do people get into the sort of the business now?
I'd recommend that they came and spoke to somebody like me, not necessarily me, somebody that's been around a little while, because there's a wealth of experience and there's an awful lot of different disciplines in surveying. I mean, valuation is one discipline, building surveying is quite another, building engineering is a third. And so um, the people that are coming newly into the surveyor role would be well advised to have a chat with somebody that's been around for a long time, because I think that not every discipline is for everyone. And I think that I mean, we used to do taster days, we used to do taster weeks. I mean, I remember years ago we had tie-ups, you know, it doesn't happen anymore, sadly, but we used to have tie-ups with local universities that they could send people across that came and worked with us for a week, 2 weeks, a month, however long it was. And they'd see what we did, and then they'd go on to somebody that did something slightly different, either within our practice or at a different practice. And then they could then form in their own mind which elements of what surveyors and valuers do and engineers do that they may like or not like. And I don't think that until you've experienced a little bit of what a day-to-day surveyor does, you can really know what's going to appeal to you. The thing with the assessment of professional competence, as it's called now for the RICS, is that you need to select a number of core disciplines. And those core disciplines are quite wide in what you can select. And it's as well for anybody that it's on the first step of the path towards RICS membership or building engineering membership, that they should get as wider experience as they can before they choose which discipline or disciplines are for them. I suppose what I did in my early years is that I tried everything really. I was with a practice that was an estate agency, that did some engineering, that were valuers, that were building surveyors, and I spent some time in each of those areas. And although I do possess the estate agency qualification, I'm not an estate agent. I've never sold a house other than when I was being taught how to do it all those years ago. But I think it's as well always to have your finger in lots of pies, so you can find out what's going on in that field, and then you get the fuller picture. I think you get in a global picture of what's going on. The more disciplines you're involved with, the more bodies and associations that you're a member of. But I think that if I were starting out again now, do you know, I don't think I'd do anything different. You know, I've enjoyed it all. As I've seen it all, enjoyed it all. I mean, there are times when you're standing in front of this huge big lump in the pouring down rain and the snow and the fog that you do wonder why you don't have an office job. But I don't think I'd do anything different, really.
No, that's yeah. I think you're very lucky if you're coming to the end of your career and you've enjoyed it pretty much every step bar the odd rainy day. I think there's probably few people that can say that really, which is kind of a shame. But no, I'm glad, and I think for the sake of this podcast or this time, as hopefully we'll get you on a few times, as there's probably so many things to go.
Pleasure.
The most common sort of interaction, I guess, that the normal sort of our listeners will have with someone like yourself will probably be in just normal sort of valuations for lending purposes, potentially if they're doing developments, sort of a development appraisal, that kind of thing, but it will be very much in the case of a normal valuation. And one of the words that does come up quite a lot on there is a red book valuation. Are you able just to explain what that is? Because it's an interesting name for them, and where that sort of comes from.
Well, I'd say the red book is interestingly named because it has a red cover. That's where red book comes from.
Well, that makes sense.
Well, it did really when you had to buy the red book with its red covers, but now of course it's all online. I'm not sure if it's got a red cover on it now online, but it's these series of regulations and standards that surveyors and valuers have to comply with when providing advice on particular types of property. There are special assumption references that, so for example, the way I might value a house in multiple occupation, an HMO, may be slightly different to the way I might value your house or flat. And the red book, the RICS valuation standards 2022, will give all valuers guidance on what they should and shouldn't take into account. So it's really a set of rules is all it is. It's quite detailed and quite specific, and woe betide if you don't follow them. But as I say, the red book is simply the colour of its sleeve, which it could easily have been green book or blue book or yellow book, but it happened to be the red book.
Just happened to be, because interestingly enough, and on that that sort of note, obviously, first, another thing I completely forgot to say when you first said it is it is RICS because rather than RICS, or does it not matter?
Well, it probably matters to them. The Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, RICS, based
They
down
won't
in
be
Cardiff.
offended
Yeah.
if we say RICS then.
No, I think it won't be the first time they've heard it. And, no, the RICS is, lots of people refer to them as RICS, but yeah, the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors is what the title usually is. And those of us that are qualified are chartered surveyors. Although these days there are a number, for youngsters that want to come in, becoming a chartered surveyor, becoming a fellow of the RICS is probably the ultimate. Becoming a member of the RICS, a corporate member of the RICS, is probably most people's goal. But there are other forms of membership now, a SOC membership, associate membership, student membership is always a good, I think student membership might be free at the RICS, and so anybody that's considering a career in surveying would be well advised just to look up, get onto the RICS website and search membership grades. And if somebody's not qualified or not even really started the path to be a surveyor, it would be a good bit of advice just to register if they're thinking about it as a student member. As I say, I'm pretty sure it's free, but and for that student membership, there is access into various materials and things that are useful guidance from the RICS as to the next stage in getting along the career path. So that would be a good bit of advice. But yeah, I mean, RICS is one way that the RICS is referred to.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, I'll stick with the RICS from now on. I know I've been calling it RICS for must be 7-8 years or whatever, but I'll sort of revert that now if that's the way it's meant to be. And do you have to, if you are sort of valuing properties, do you have to be a member of the RICS or not?
But, if you're valuing properties for a lender, then you have to be a regulated valuer. And so that's another sort of subdivision. So once you're a chartered surveyor, you'll then register and pay your annual fee as a chartered surveyor, and you'll pay an additional fee for being a regulated valuer. And so what tends to happen then is that opens up the arena that you can undertake valuation work for lenders. And most lenders won't use unregulated valuers for their red book valuations for loan security purposes. But anybody can value anything, but whether it's appropriate to do so if you're not fully qualified and don't have professional indemnity cover is probably a bit foolhardy. So, I mean, you could, if you wanted your house valued, you can ask the next man that walks down the road if you like. And there have been cases where I forget the name of the case, but it was many years ago, where two people were discussing over the fence the condition of something on the back of somebody's property. So one neighbour to another, and one neighbour gave advice over the fence, unqualified, that proved defective, and the neighbour who then was out of pocket successfully sued the neighbour the other side of the fence. So I wish I could remember the name of the title now, but you have really to be careful. And I always caution people about going outside the area of their expertise. I don't think it's ever a good thing to best guess. You have to know what you're doing, or you don't do that job at all. So whilst anybody really can value outside of the arena for secured lending, unless you know what you're doing, I don't think it's a good area to be in. If you get it wrong, then there's a little bit of liability there.
Yeah, I can imagine. And talking about the liability, there's been quite a bit of talk lately about the PI cover, the professional indemnity cover for valuers. And some people, and this might not be true, so if you can set the record straight, that there has been some tightening of rules, especially around bridging lending, which has led to some valuers not actually being able to undertake valuations for bridging lenders or short-term lenders. Is there any truth to that, or is that just a rumor?
No, I think if you put it in perspective, really, what's happened is that some years ago the market for professional indemnity that surveyors and their brokers could go into was quite large, and then I suppose where I saw the market hardening is when whatever happens in America always comes this way, doesn't it? Almost always. And there were huge, big legal cases in America, people suing people right, left, and centre. And I'm afraid that's come over here. And surveyors, valuers are getting sued, whether or not they actually get their advice wrong. The perception is if a lender loses something, they're going to go after somebody, aren't they? And so the target is the surveyor, the valuer that's provided them with the advice. There's a tendency for what's called confetti claims over the years. Let's just get this claim out and see where we go with it. And that's hardened the market. Lots of insurance firms that don't want to take the risk of going to court have settled. That's encouraged more claims. It's made a number of insurance providers think twice about being in the market. And it's not that long ago, perhaps 2-3 years ago, that there were very, very, very few providers of professional indemnity cover. That saw two things. It saw a very significant hike in rates. And if I told you what most surveyors now pay for whatever cover they go for, make your eyes water.
Come on, spill the beans. Let's hear it.
Well,
What's
I mean,
is a lot?
most, of course, I'm not going to tell you what ours is, but
No,
I can give you
just in general.
In general, most most valuation firms, I'd say, of reasonable size would want PI cover of somewhere around £2 or £5 million. Let's say an average 5 million PI cover. Some firms do carry 10, 20, 30 even, and more. The bigger firms in London carry vast amounts of cover. But the typical PI cover for a £5 million. So if we're being covered for £5 million, you would be very, very, very hard pressed to get PI for under £100,000 a year,
Wow.
which is a fortune. It's not that long ago where that same 5 million cover would have been £20,000 or £25,000. In some, I mean, I've heard horrendous quotes being received by some firms over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And so what's happened is, the second branch to that is that firms have been forced to negotiate with the insurance provider better terms. And the only way you're going to get better terms is to reduce the risk. And the bridging arena is considered risky by professional indemnity insurance providers. And so if you say, okay, we're not going to do bridging lending because it's risky, you've got a chance of staying in business, although your work pool will be less if you're used to doing a lot of bridging lending work. And some firms that high quality firms haven't been able to get professional indemnity cover because of the cost of PI. I remember the most horrendous case I heard recently was, well, I say recently, it would have been around about 5, 6, 7 years or so ago. The PI cover for this particular firm, which had been somewhere around £100,000, was offered on renewal at £1,005,000.
Wow.
And shocking, absolutely shocking. And of course, that's unsustainable, really. And so, though that particular firm was forced to reconsider what sort of work it would do, and it continues to trade today, doing work that is less broad than it did all those years ago.
Because if you think about it, like on the average sort of valuation cost, let's say for us, it's probably somewhere in between £500 and £1,000 plus VAT. So let's say on the top end of that, £1,000 for our sort of level of lending, you have to do 100 valuations before you even just cover your PI. Not you necessarily, but these sort of firms. And then obviously you then get to sort of paying people. That's a lot of work, considering the sort of amount of time it takes to review sort of properties, get the report over. And that's actually surprised me. And it kind of neatly leads on to sort of a question about potential earnings in as a valuer or surveyor. Obviously, again, not going to ask you specifically unless you want to share, but what are the sort of potential incomes for people that do actually operate in as valuers?
Well, I think there are opportunities to earn really well, mainly related to the lack of people coming into the profession. I mean, the average age of a surveyor now is certainly late 50s, and because there's not so much labour pool available, surveying firms are having to pay a lot of money to get good talent in. So I would imagine that somebody that's just qualified at the RICS as a chartered surveyor, as a member, as an MRICS, as opposed to an F, which is a fellow, might start at around £65,000 a year, something like that, plus bonuses. Those bonuses would be a percentage of the fees over and above a certain amount per month, per quarter, or however long.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of money, but that's where it is. I mean, but it's not that long. If you'd have asked me that question 2 to 3 years ago, I'd have told you it would start at about 45. But nowadays, 65,000 pounds, possibly 70,000 pounds for a qualified chartered surveyor is the going rate. And anybody that's been around in the profession for a few years and is starting to get reasonably well versed in various areas of the profession would comfortably earn north and sometimes well north of £100,000 per annum if they worked hard. So, but you see, there's no point being a chartered surveyor if it's not something which is going to interest you. And so, whilst those levels of potential income are high in comparison with a number of other jobs, the job is the job. It's not for everybody. I mean, the game these days is influencing, isn't it? I think people want to be influencers.
That's the podcast about and so it's fine. That is like I'm actually quite surprised, and in regards to what people can earn, and one of the things that as you're saying, in terms of if people are sort of interested in property and that kind of thing, would you say it's a good sort of thing because you get involved with those? You get to sort of see properties. I don't know how often you're able to sort of come across cheap deals that maybe you could take advantage of. Is that something you're allowed to do, or is there a conflict of interests that crop up, or how does that work?
Sadly, it's a very specific conflict. So no, you might look at something and think, "Oh, that's a good deal," but woe betide if you got involved in it. No,
you're not allowed to put a cheeky offer in and gazump the buyer.
Not if you want to be a surveyor. Not unless you want to maintain your chartered status.
Yeah. I thought that would be the case, but yeah, at least it's because I think it's a sort of industry that you could probably use the skills that you have to actually analyze other deals, obviously not anyone else's deals, but your own that you go out and source. Are you into property at all on the side, or is this sort of as in like developments or anything like that?
Not really, no. I mean, it's a bit like a busman's holiday, isn't it, really? It's busy enough as it is. I mean, I enjoy sort of other things in life, really. I mean, that said, I suppose, I live in an old property at the moment, and my missus wants one of these concrete and glass things where you don't have to do anything. And I'm sort of finding that I've seen those being built over the years, and I'm not so sure that I could physically do it myself, but I could certainly oversee the construction of something like that. So when the time comes to leave the wonky floors and the doors that don't open today but do tomorrow, and go to something modern, I think I might like to get involved with overseeing, something along the way. That would be quite good.
A grand design, sort of massive, sort of glass monster.
Yeah, I mean, my interests. I mean, there are an awful lot of opportunities. If you like the profession, there are awful lots of areas that it takes you into. I've done quite a lot of TV and radio over the years, because I mean, I used to do a lot of stuff for BBC Wales because although I may not sound that Welsh, Arwel Griffith is definitely North Walian. So I used to enjoy doing some live phone-ins where people had problems. property problems. You know, I'm not going to tell them to fix their gammy leg or something, you know, but I could tell them what's wrong with the roof or whatever. But that's you know, that's just a different thing you can get into. I mean, the thrill of the chase, if you like. I mean, you don't have to just. And I don't think I could just day in day out do the same thing, I suppose is what I'm saying. And almost every day is different, you know, even if it is just a different type of building. A different age of building comes with its own challenges, doesn't it? It's built differently. It might have a different way the roof stays on, a different type of roof, and every single facet of every single building you look at has its own challenges. And the key, I think, is learning along the way. What are the pointers that something may not be quite right? People often ask me when I go to a property, what are you looking at? People say to me, don't look at the mess. Well, I don't see the mess. I don't see the mess. You know, I look at the building. And people will often say, what is it that you're looking at? And I suppose the best way I've been able to try and explain that is, if I don't feel overly well for some reason or t'other, I'll go to the doctor. And the doctor is probably asking me questions about how I feel, and in his or her mind has a completely different picture of if I than I would if I were looking in the mirror. You know, they're seeing me almost as an X-ray. What could be going on? What's that symptom causing that? Is that related? And I suppose as a surveyor or a valuer is doing the same thing. You're turning up to look at something and you're seeing a completely different animal to what the person might be seeing who actually lives there. You're looking at it almost in X-ray form, if you like. And so I like that thrill of turning up and looking at whichever building it is, because everything's different. Unless you're looking at a pair of semis one day, a pair of 1930s semi-detached houses, exactly the same, different handed. But that seldom happens these days. Everything's different. What I saw this morning will be different to what I'm looking at tomorrow.
Asking how many sort of properties do you see a day?
Depends which field you're in. I mean, if you're a surveyor that's employed by one of these big corporates, they'll probably want a certain number of points per day. 1 point for a standard mortgage valuation of a standard size house, 3 points perhaps for a home buyer. So they would probably want a home buyer and 2 or 3 valuations, which for me is far too much. You can't do them properly at that level. And I have heard of valuers being asked to do 5 or 6 mortgage valuations a day, every day. So that's 25 or 30 a week. You know, that's not on.
I think one of the valuer we had to come do our remortgage must have been one of those. He was in and out within about 2 minutes. Literally got his laser out, point at the wall, point at the wall, point at the wall. Thanks so much, bye, and that was it.
Yeah.
I was actually shocked how quick
Well,
that was. It was a basic
drives me
flat,
crackers.
so.
Yeah, but it's, you know, it shouldn't be that way. It drives me absolutely crackers when, you know, I hear that a lot. You know, if I turn up to do, say, a building survey, a standard 3-bed semi building survey will be 3 to 4 hours to be done properly. And I can't, you know, I'm trying to rack my brain sitting here thinking, well, how could it be 2 hours? How could it be 2.5 hours? Well, it can't be if it's done properly. My boss always used to say, if you get a surveyor that turns up in his suit and tie and he's doing a building survey, he's not doing it properly. Because is he going to get into the loft and climb around in all the dust and dirt, which is what you need to do. Yeah, otherwise you're not going to see it. And I think that a standard mortgage value, the quickest 1-bedroom valuation for a flat of, say, 500 square feet has got to be half an hour, 40 minutes minimum to be done properly. You know, and there are, and the reason he was at your place for 2 minutes is time pressure. he's got to get to the next one, got to get to the next one, got to get to the next one. And I also lament a little bit these tablet systems, the tick box. Does it have a roof? Yes. Does it have windows? Yes.
You're describing that guy
Yeah.
precisely.
Yeah.
With that sort of thing. Does it have a balcony? Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Did he see the balcony? No, he didn't. Just took
Well,
our
and
word for it.
Well, his report will almost certainly be sent off before he's left your road in his car. It'll gone off for printing and or whatever, not printing, for distribution. We found little tricks to be quicker over the years. I mean, our typing is done in New Zealand, for example. So if all the surveyors get back, I don't know, let's say 3 o'clock in the afternoon from a day's play, and if they're all dictating, we don't require them to do any more than 2 usually in a day, decent sized ones. We don't really, I suppose we're slightly different. We don't really do small valuations. We don't really do your couple £100,000 houses or flats or something. We do slightly bigger stuff. So we don't want the surveyors out and about on the road not having the time to do things properly. And so the standard rule number 1 here is do the thing properly, or don't bother. And of course, if they're all getting back at 3 o'clock in the afternoon dictating, we use a smartphone handheld dictation system. So they do the research, they're ready to go with all the papers in front of them. They'll dictate we do have a standard template, which is quite a long one. But they'll dictate the reports and they'll send it off to New Zealand. And as long as it's in New Zealand by 7 o'clock tonight, it'll be back for 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. So that's where we think we can speed up, and it's on service speed as opposed to inspection speed.
Yeah, because they're working while you're sleeping over there.
Yeah. Or eating me fish and chips or something, and,
yeah.
They typo. And if you find a good one, and ours are excellent, then when it comes back, but I'll be dictating something later that will go to New Zealand, that will be back for me to check through, and I'll be in the office probably around 7:30 tomorrow morning, and it will be at the lender by 10, I guess, by the time the office has PDF'd it and got it sent over. The research is done, the dictation isn't done, and it will be a few short hours and it's there. So we've shaved service time off, and as I say, I can't see how you can practically do something faster than the time to inspect it properly is the time to inspect it properly, isn't it? Really, I mean, you can't run around somebody's house because you want to save half an hour or something.
Talking of saving time, I know we didn't actually use them specifically during the time, but during lockdown and following lockdown, there's been a lot of people that are actually using automated valuations. Are you able to talk to us and let everyone know sort of what they are and how reliable they might be?
Well, I think the problem I have with them is that a good number of them will give you lots of comparable evidence, and wherever that comparable evidence is drawn from, it tends to be fairly limited in its detail. And what it does is to say, oh, this house down the road that also had 3 bedrooms sold for that much on that date. Then another comparable, well, yes, it's another 3-bedroom house. But I don't think there's any substitute to having eyes on. Someone somewhere has to have an eye on what this comparable evidence is, upon which the advice from the automated system is given. I mean, a 3-bedroom house, which is 1930s built, is different in many respects to a 1900 built 3-bedroom house, is much different to a 1960s built, just post Second World War 3-bed house, is very different to a 3-bedroom house just finished last week. And so it's not enough, I don't think, for an automated system to say, we've researched all 3-bedroom houses within a mile or whatever, and this is the average, and this is upon which we think the range is X to X. I suppose it depends on how accurate the lender or those using it need that range to be, because I suppose if you're lending 20% of the lower part of that range, then the risk is probably reasonably minimal. But I don't think I've always been an advocate for somebody somewhere to look at something, whether it be a photograph, whether it be detail provided by an automated system, and decide how right that system is likely to be or not. So it's useful. And don't get me wrong, I don't think they're useless. I think they're useful, but they can be very easily bettered for minimal additional time and minimal additional cost.
We can end on a relatively topical sort of question, and that's in regards to the mortgage rates and the impact of the recent sort of mini budget and everything, and the rates looking as though they're going to continue to increase. Firstly, have you seen any immediate impact on the property sort of market? And if I can ask you, like I do with most of our guests, to get your crystal ball out and give a little bit of a prediction, where do you think it's going to sort of end up, and what impact do you think it will have in the sort of short to medium term?
In answer to your first question, yes, there's been quite a discernible drop-off in inquiries. Sorry, it's been a flat-out 24 months. I think we can sustain growth and activity, I think, in the market, and everybody seemed to have been settling down a little. Good rates and lending durations offered by lenders, and people sort of knew where they were. But the last, I'd say, 10 days has definitely quietened the market. There are still a good number of inquiries coming in, requests for quotations, those sort of things. But diaries that were perhaps booked, say 4 or 5 or sometimes 6 weeks in advance, that's how busy it was, are now being booked perhaps 2 weeks in advance. And so there's been quite a marked change very quickly. We think that there's going to be probably a quiet remainder of October, whilst people try and get a handle on exactly what's happening and where rates are going. Obviously, the upward pressure is on interest rates, and people are understandably a bit scared about where they're going. And I think what with other things going on around the world and rising costs at home, I think it's inevitable, really, when people see these costs going up, that they need to try and wrestle back a bit of control, don't they? And they're not going to spend a fortune on new places. But that said, my dad had a great saying, "It'll pass," he used to say. And it didn't matter if it was when I was a young kid in a scrape in school, or in my footballing days when we weren't playing that well. I remember one game where we were playing and we lost 3-2, and I scored all 3 of the opposition's goals in my own net. It will pass, he said. And I think the same with the property market, because if people aren't buying something to move to, they may decide to spend some money on improvements or extensions to their existing homes. So there'll be some activity in the building industry, in the construction industry, in architectural industry. They might borrow money to do that, in smaller chunks than moving home. I do think interest rates will go a little higher. Gilt rates, as you know, are increasing, and the property market is a little bit more volatile than gilts. And so as gilt rates go up, the property interest rates are going to be higher than that. So it'd be a good thing to watch how the gilts interest rate performs. And there's an upward pressure on those as well. So I think where I see it, now this is where my crystal ball is. But as I say, after I've given you my view, I will also give you the winning numbers for this Saturday's lottery. So
you.
get your pen ready. I think we're going to be quieter, and there's going to be a much reduced level of activity for October. And until we get some sort of certainty on where interest rates are going and some stability and a little bit more stability around the world, I think the property market's going to be quieter. But then people have got to live somewhere, haven't they? I mean, if the buying to live somewhere is quieter, then there will be perhaps an improvement in rental properties. I mean, Zoopla and Rightmove are currently forecasting for example, that for London and the home counties, rents are likely to increase somewhere between 3 and 5% this next 12 months. And I know that they are considering a revision to that upwards. And so there is an area of almost every property market that will do better cyclically. And I think that in the buy-to-let arena, the demand will be so strong from people that perhaps want to rent than buy, then there will be good levels of activity over there, if you like. So it'll pass. And I think that when things settle and there's a little bit of certainty, then I think things will return to a little bit of normality. Whether it will go all the way down to those low interest rates that we had before, probably not. But you're talking to somebody that first bought a flat with a Citibank mortgage for 17.5%. So that seems such a long time ago, and there's a big difference.
I think that would bankrupt a lot of people if that happened now.
It would be a disaster, and so it's not going to happen. But for me, I think we're going to be where we are now for some time. And whilst October will be quiet, we're not going to return to, in November to where we were the last 12 months. I think we've got a year's worth of consolidation, of seeing where we all are, seeing how much we've all got, what we want to do with our lives, how world and UK events pan out. But we might all be in a better position now. Now I give you those lottery numbers.
Yeah, no, thank you. Because it was really interesting, your comments about the buy-to-let side of things, because how much do you think Zoopla and Rightmove's predictions on the rents increasing are because that demand will go up, as opposed to the interest rates have gone up? So buy-to-let landlords will have to up their rent to cover that increase, or do you think it's like a double whammy where it'll build on top of each other?
I think I've done quite a lot of refinancing of HMOs and buy-to-let places over the last 12 months or so. And I think some lenders had longer term bridges, if you like, contradiction in terms perhaps, but some lenders had terms of 5 years or so. And I think a lot of landlords have not necessarily seen coming what's going on now, but have been prudent enough to fix for quite a long time at rates that were a lot cheaper than they currently are. And so the whammy of having to put up rents to cover additional mortgage costs, yeah, I can see that. I can see that there will be a number of landlords that will have to do that. But I suspect that the stronger force for upward rents will be demand, because there's a finite supply of these things, and regulation in that industry is tight now. You can't just open your doors and let it. There's all sorts of regulations now what you have to comply with. And as the demand increases, then I can see that being the main driver for the increase in rents that Zoopla and Rightmove are forecasting. What you don't really want is, I can't see there is a slight issue that I think might arise, and that interest rates for buy-to-lets or for landlords wanting to buy go so high that they don't bother. And if they don't bother replenishing their stock, then the supply of rooms in an increasing level of demand can only force rents even higher. For me, my forecast is that it will be more than 5% in the next 12 months. But, what do I know? Anything can happen. It's just, I'm sitting here with my finger in the air, just like everybody else is trying to best guess.
I guess it really does depend on what the Bank of England does, the government does, as well as obviously the global situation. I guess it's a watch this space sort of thing. But I've probably held you long enough, and I know I've only got through, I would say, about 2/3 of the questions that I was hoping to. But we can get to that next time. And I was wondering if there are still people listening, which hopefully there are, they will actually, going back to your radio days, want to submit comments below so that we can obviously answer those. So the next time we have you on, hopefully in a month or two or a couple of months, you'll be able to go through them. So please do leave a comment below if you do have a question for Arwel, property related, or anything. We'll filter some of those out that aren't. Before I let you go, would you like to let people know either where they can find you, or obviously get some help and support from your firm at all?
Yeah, if they want to get in touch with me, by all means, it's JRW Chartered Surveyors, 0845 838 0930, or give me a buzz on directly on my mobile, 07850 204 037. Delighted to assist. Or if I can't assist, I may know somebody who can. I can pop you in the right direction.
Perfect. And I'll have all of the links and various bits and pieces in the description below. So thanks ever so much for your time. I really appreciated it. And then, yeah, definitely we'll have to do it again.
I shall look forward to it. And have a good evening.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Cheers.
David. Bye.